Good day, everybody. My name is Carlos. Welcome to another episode of My Life Without Limits with myself and our co-host Leah, who I'm going to introduce just now, and I'm going to let her introduce herself as she always does. So,
Yeah.
how are you doing, Leah?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. Doing
You're,
pretty good.
yeah,
Yeah.
the lighting is great in your office.
Yeah, it looks good.
It's sunny outside. It might be cold outside still, even though it's kind of
Yes.
sunny, but
Our
it
winter
might.
is long, and I know in Calgary it's not been good down there.
No, not
No,
either.
it's not been good.
So yeah, how's your day overall? Good, good,
Yes. Yeah, the day's
awesome.
been going by. It's nice and quiet in the office today without
It
our
is.
rowdy coworkers, just you and I and our friend Wilson. And
And
yeah, it's
our
pretty
friend.
quiet, but it's good though.
Absolutely, that's awesome. I'm
Yeah.
good as well. Um, we have an amazing guest that you were able to also find on social media, which you always creep on people, as I
I
always say.
do.
And you found this amazing guest that we have
Yes.
today. And we're gonna talk about an interesting topic that we haven't really talked about a lot, and it's not really talked about much. Uh, uh, I would say more so, unless it's like usually it's like mostly a private topic, I would say, but
Mhm.
it's starting to be more and more aware of people just talking about this wonderful topic. So we have this great guest that I want you to introduce, Leah, and I want you to introduce it because you found him, and yeah, so that's great.
No, very happy to introduce our new friend Alan here from the Disability and Sexuality Lab from Calgary. I saw a tweet and was like, "Oh, I love this! I love this!" Because you know me, I like to try and talk about things that we're not supposed to, or people are shy about it and
Mhm.
or might whatever. But I think it's something that we need to get into. So I'm very happy to have you here with us. Thank you for joining us. So why don't you just let us know a little bit about yourself?
For sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me today. And it's amazing the power of social media. It does bring
Hmm.
people together sometimes.
Yep.
So that's fantastic. My name is Alan Martino, and I'm an assistant professor in the Disability Studies program at the University of Calgary.
Hmm.
And my research is community-based and has always focused on intersections of disability, gender, and sexualities. So I'm
Yes.
always trying to learn about people's experiences with romance, intimacy, pleasure, sex, whatever it means to them.
Yep. And it's important because some people might not know, but people with disabilities can and do have sex. You know?
Uh,
Yeah. And so do you
Absolutely.
do you find that there is a big stigma out there to think that, there's either no access or people with disabilities don't need to have sex?
Absolutely, right? There's still so much infantilization of people with disabilities. This notion
Mm.
that people with disabilities are childlike, innocent, not interested in sexuality, right?
Yeah.
And that is totally a myth. But unfortunately, because of this kind of stereotype, sometimes or most of the times, people with disabilities don't even have access to sex education, right?
Yeah.
They're automatically removed from sex education classes because it's assumed that they don't need the content or they don't understand it. And that should be the opposite. Everyone should have access to sex education and information.
Yes. Yeah, it's so important because I mean, yeah, if you don't have the right knowledge out there, I mean, it gets misused and become vulnerable. But yeah, you need that knowledge and it should be, I like your social media. I absolutely love it. Like I go and I tell Carlos, I'm like, oh, today they asked if people knew what the emoji of an eggplant meant. And I said, I would love to be able to post stuff like that because and the way it looks like you're making it inviting and it's fun and you're putting a really good spin on it, and it's all great information that gets conversation started, right? Which is so great. I love it.
No, thanks. Thanks for the feedback. And indeed, that's one of the things that we're trying to do it differently, right, in our lab. Sometimes when we talk about disability and sexuality, we only focus on the negative aspects, right?
Yeah.
Like it's abuse, it's inappropriate behaviors, and all those things. And of course, protection is important, right? Like everyone should be navigating the community safely, but it doesn't just end there, right? Like sexuality is much more than that. It's about Netflix and chill. It's about
Yes.
holding hands on a Friday night. It's about making out sometimes, you know. It includes so much more than just those boring topics. So for
Mhm.
the lab, we're always like, nothing is a taboo topic. We want to, you know, give people the vocabulary to talk about sexuality, participate in online dating if that's something they want to, and do
Yeah.
so safely and in a satisfying, fun way.
Yeah. And it's important too for that, as me as the mother of a preteen, even learning, I mean, I knew about the eggplant and all these different things, but I mean, if it's a parent that maybe isn't as in tune and they are to see what their kids are typing and what messages are coming through, and you see those things, you can kind of be like, oh, maybe I should sit down and talk to my child about what's going on here. So I think that's an education that's you guys are helping with, the whole community that way, not just the disability community in that sense.
For sure, because it's amazing. Like I kept getting requests from family members like to get
Mhm.
supports and information. So I was like, how about we just create resources and tips for
Yeah.
parents who want to start these conversations with their sons and daughters, just don't know how, maybe, right?
Yeah.
So that has been a really good feedback from family members. Like, how do I start this conversation? And yeah, it's been exciting to see more and more families being willing to engage in this topic.
Yeah.
Very encouraging.
That's good. No, that's good to hear.
It is very important because, like I said, when we started earlier here on our podcast, it's a topic that it's not really for that many families open to talk about because mostly with, as you're saying, with persons with disabilities, coming from a place like Mexico where I was born, uh, persons with disabilities were hidden, right? The majority of it. So they were not, even sex wasn't even in the vocabulary for them, right? I mean, it started to be more and more of seeing that individuals with disabilities, whether it's cerebral palsy or any other disability, they're able to be intimate. They're able to be, to
Mhm.
have a romantic relationship. Uh, and is normal for everybody else. And it's great to see what you are doing because believe it or not, it even helps persons like me. I haven't had a chance to look at your Twitter, but I mean, I had the opportunity to hear Lias commenting on all the emojis and all the great,
I was
you know,
quizzing him on
yeah,
some too. Yeah.
all the great, the lines that you put in there
Conversation going.
and
Yeah.
how you have the communication and we were having a great conversation on it and that helps me understanding and even having even a better security on my own future intimacy when I get to have it, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that's good.
And I think everyone benefits from more open conversations about sexualities, right?
Yeah.
Whether you have a disability or not, I think in general, everyone would benefit from having more honest and like open, lighthearted conversations about sexuality that is not just about embarrassing or taboo, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I grew up in Brazil and I had an older sibling with cerebral palsy growing up, and it's amazing how it was always so much more comfortable talking about employment, education, those parts of life. But then
Yeah.
when it comes to relationships, it's like it's a quiet topic that stays at the back burner.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing too, like that I'm trying to do with my work is romantic life, sexual life is equally important. Like we're not just employees, we're not just students, we're everything, including someone who wants sometimes to be loved and have someone to love. And I think that's equally important.
Yeah. And deserving, right? Everybody deserves that, kind of love and to learn about, consent and, all that kind of stuff, which is very important too. Because I know when I do like research for news articles to put out and I'm Googling certain keywords about disabilities. And then, oh, yeah, some of the articles that come up about, sexual abuse, because, those individuals with disabilities might not have been talked to about it. So they don't know that it's okay to put up a fight and say no because they're in a vulnerable position. So I think the more you talk about it, the more they'll learn about that, yeah, you can say no. And then, of course, teaching people what no means. you know?
100%. And I think, I'm always trying to shift the conversation around vulnerability too, because sometimes we just focus on individuals, but I think we need to focus on how we can make people with disabilities more vulnerable. We make people with disabilities, for example, more
Right.
vulnerable by not giving people vocabulary to talk
Yeah.
about sexuality, understand the body parts of the body. So not having these conversations, and that's what the research shows, not having conversations about sexuality actually makes people less prepared to be
Yes.
safe in the community, right? So
Yeah.
it's very important for family members, especially, to understand that we're doing a disservice when we're just avoiding this topic, right? The best, really, that we know from the research is that the more you talk about it, the more naturally open-minded way you talk about it, people are more likely to disclose the experience of abuse, right? Or be able to prevent some of those experiences. And that's the way to go, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And then it also helps people understand other communities, that, with everything going on, with the drag community in Calgary and all those things, I think people don't know enough about that community that they make their perceptions where they should be learning more about them before they make, those decisions. And I think that this kind of thing too, it just helps you understand, the gay community better. That, I mean, we're all just looking for love and,
Yeah.
you
And
know,
that's another stereotype that I've seen too. Like sometimes people
Mhm.
assume that people with disabilities can only be heterosexual and
Right, that,
cisgender,
yes.
and that's the only thing offered.
Yeah.
I certainly encounter even service providers at times that were like, come on, Alan, you're telling me that people with disabilities have sexual desires, and now that there's sexualities in the plural, like not everyone's heterosexual. Yes,
Yeah.
and that I recently did
Absolutely.
a research project in Alberta, and I got to interview 31 LGBTQ folks with developmental and intellectual disabilities. And it was really fascinating because what most people shared is that they really face so many barriers to go to queer spaces, right? They're not accessible. And we're not just talking about accessibility like a ramp, right? It's really about like attitudinal, for example, like not feeling welcome into those spaces and so on.
Right.
So there is a disconnect sometimes in communities as well. So queer disabled people, they want to participate in those spaces, but don't feel like quite welcome or able to participate in those. And what I also learned is that sometimes talking about sexuality or gender identity in more disability focused spaces usually doesn't get as much space either, right?
Yeah,
You're
very
just a
true.
person with a disability, and that's it.
Yeah.
So I think we need to bring communities together a little bit more and understand that some people do identify as both, right?
Yeah.
Not just one.
Yeah.
But don't you think, Alan, that that's a global issue, or not a global, but a broader issue? Because yes, I do have myself. I have had friends who are able-bodied and who are homosexuals or who are from part of the LGBTQ communities. Uh, 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 but but I cannot imagine. Well, I actually know someone who has a disability and who is also a part of that community. And talking to him about it, he was telling me that he had barriers going into where you're just explaining where barriers to join those people. But he was explaining that it was more so the disability aspect than the whole LGBTQ aspect from his side of point of view. I don't know what you think about it, whether your research shows that it was more that or it was a connection together between them to make it more like a barrier. But I agree with you. I think we should break those blocks down so then people can still join, because those people, whether you're heterosexual or you are from the LGBTQ community, you're still looking for love. You're still looking for somebody to love you. And if the situation is the disability situation plus the being in the LGBTQ community, will make it harder in my sense. I don't know what you feel about that, what you see it on it.
Yeah, you're really speaking to that complexity, right? Like when you have more than one identity that kind of, experiences some kind of oppression or marginalization, right? And that's what I've seen. And it's very hard to sometimes for people to even unpack what is playing a role at times, right? In different interactions and spaces. Even, for example, people who tell me about navigating online dating, right? It's
Mhm.
Right.
always such a tricky space, right? In
Mhm.
terms of folks who, for example, who have to disclose their disability, but have to disclose also their sexual identity sometimes.
Mhm.
And it's
Mhm.
always trying to guess when is the right time and how do I do it and with whom I do it, right? Disclosing both. What I've seen too is the exhausting labor of doing it, having to explain to partners like what is cerebral palsy, what is, you
Mhm.
know, this or that. And
Yeah.
it's a lot of work and investment that
Mhm.
goes into it, right? And sometimes relationships don't work out. And then here we go again to educate another person, right?
What I find with online dating is I have had experience with online dating where, well, I'm a heterosexual person, but when I go into online dating, it seems like, as you're saying, you have to first hide your disability because at first for me, every person is asking, what are you doing? Why do you don't work this way? Like I was reading an article that you were on, I don't remember what it was, but about the guy saying that, oh, I feel sorry for you. You know what I mean? It's this the simple conversation that some people say to you. And even if they don't say it at first, but then once you're establishing a relationship with that particular person that you're seeing or that you're being, then the flaws that everyone has, but in this case, a person with a disability like myself may show even more. Then that person started to back up and back up and back up. You know what I mean? And then when it comes to intimacy, it's even harder because you're trying to explain how your body works and explain how your situation works, and it's harder because if the other person doesn't want to work with you, then it's not going to work. So with online dating, for me, it seems like it's harder to, in a way, to transmit or to direct the message that you're supposed to, right? And it's tough. It's really
Yeah.
tough for a person with a disability, whether, and I have heard some people saying, oh, well, maybe you should match with someone who has a disability so then you can relate. And I said, well, yes, I might want to do that, but I might not. I might want to find somebody who's
Yeah.
able-bodied who will be able to love me for who I am, and then meet up, meet up, meet up through that way. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's tough. So
No, absolutely. And you know, what you make me think about, especially the intimacy piece, it's kind of unfortunate that sometimes we have like a script of how we expect things to happen. It's almost like
Mhm.
sex can only happen this way, or relationships
Yeah.
only happen this way, you know, like, or there's steps to follow. And it's just, I personally find it very silly. And I feel like it loses so much of the creativity that
yeah.
sexuality allows to us, right? I've spoken with folks in the community, for example, who found other parts of the body to be way more sensual than the typical parts that we like to pay attention
Right.
to.
Mhm.
I spoke with people who are trying to think way more creatively in terms of what they do in the bedroom that, you know, again, I think non-disabled people too would benefit from having a much better menu of options rather
Yes.
than just this is the way to do it. I'd never forget one person, this young woman I talked to. She said, I'm always confused why we cannot tell jokes during sex. And indeed, I come back to her, was like, yeah, who told us that we
Yeah.
cannot tell
Who
jokes during
said?
sex? You know, why do we need to follow the script? The sex is a serious
Right.
act. Like, why it cannot be that silly,
Yes.
fun experience? The other thing that I've, appreciate is that a lot of folks that I talk to in the community, they do have to communicate with their partners, right? What positions work best for them, painful of positions or comfortable positions. And I think, again, this is a great example of how disability, I think it's such a good thing in a way,
Yeah.
because it pushes people to have this communication.
Mhm.
Non-disabled people should also benefit from having more honest conversations like
Yeah.
this. What works for me? What doesn't work for me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This doesn't feel right, you know?
Mhm.
But we just don't talk about the stuff. We just kind of assume that we should go with the flow, hope for the best, and just, yeah. And I think that's unfortunate.
Which to me makes it like, because supposedly, well, not supposedly, intimacy is supposed to be about pleasure, right? And if you have like a certain type of script of how things are going to be going, you're not making
Yeah.
it pleasurable anymore. You're not making it enjoyable anymore. You're worrying about, oh, am I in the right place? Am I in the right moment? Even if it hurts, I don't want to show my particular partner that it hurts, because I don't want to hurt her or him. In this case, for me, it's a her, feel bad, right, for the situation, right? So I'm like, yeah, like you start to feel uncomfortable, and that's why you need to make it very community, very talkative, very not with the flow, but very interactive with each other, so that we know
Yeah.
how things are going. And I've seen that with my experience, which hasn't been too many experience, but with what I what I had, is that it was a lot of tensional moments. I think it was only one time that it wasn't that much tensional moment, because it was nice, and it was the last time I had some, right? But
Yeah.
the other ones is like, it's like, okay, it was all structural, you know
Yeah.
it was all structural, and it's just sad because you don't enjoy it, plus the other person doesn't enjoy it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's interesting. Sometimes people have the stereotype that when a non-disabled person dates a person with a disability, right, that it includes so much work, right? And it's so difficult. But we see so many examples, right, in the community of couples like this who actually say that disability brings them together much more. It allows for intimacy, it allows for more communication, and it allows for more exploration. So, I mean, so many examples of how, depending on how we look at disability, right, it can
Yeah.
really be a positive, I think, in ways of relationships and sex and sexuality.
Yeah. That's very true. That's so true.
That's so true. That's
Yeah.
awesome. And Alan, I read one of your articles, and it was interesting. Uh, one of the interviews from the one guy that was saying that he wasn't having luck with online dating. Actually, I felt related, because I'm like, yeah, I'm in the same boat, like I haven't had any good luck with online dating. I actually feel more comfortable talking people face to face, because it's more like natural, but then you're thinking, or are they looking at my legs, or are they looking at my crutches, or are they looking, but I still feel more and more comfortable talking to people face to face, that online and chatting and all that situation. But he was talking about, and this is an interesting topic that I was actually talking to Leah about, is that he was saying that he was going to give up on online dating, but when he feels like having intimacy, he was going to find a safe place with a sex service place, or a place like that. And I was wondering, what do you think about that? Because the stereotypical is that it, it's look bad if you go to these sex places that are sex services, sorry, that are for intimacy, right? And the community looks bad, and mostly,
Mhm.
if you're caught going there, and somebody sees you going there, they might say, what are you doing there? Like, why
Yeah.
are you
Mhm.
going? And there's some people, like the guy from the article, who was saying, well, I have no luck on online dating, but I have this pleasure that I want
A
to
desire
have,
for it.
a
Yeah.
desire that I want to
Mhm.
have. I want to go and do it in this safe place. What do you think about this, and how do you think we can break that barrier, so then we can make it
Mhm.
more accessible, I would say?
Yeah, I think first of all, the stigma, like just like you said, right?
Yeah.
There's still a lot of stigma around folks who do like to use those services, whether it's by phone or in person, whatever means it is, right? There's still a lot of stigma in there, and we need to challenge that. I think give people more information about it. The other challenge that I've certainly seen, especially with folks labeled with intellectual disabilities, is that sometimes they don't have control over their budget, for example. So if they
Right.
want to use those services, they cannot even, dedicate money for that
Yeah.
service.
Yeah.
Or, for example, they might do it in hidden ways, or their support workers are so afraid that the parents will find out and they will get in trouble. So there's also still a lot of,
Oh.
control sometimes, right, over people's choice even to pursue something like this.
Mm-hmm.
I do know folks that would love to be able to access this kinds of services because they don't have any kind of physical touch
Yeah.
other than the touch of support workers, in their
Yeah.
lives. And I mean, that's not sexy touch.
No,
Like that's a
no.
very medical kind of touch, right? It's
Yes.
hygienic touch. So, I mean, it's very different. And I think a lot of people sometimes are just looking for that like more sensual touch for pleasure, for sex, for something that they might not be able to access in their everyday lives.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to have more conversations. I think at other countries in the world, like in some European countries, they're having way more advanced questions, like conversations about this. In Canada, I think we're still quite shy about it,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
I
this
think
topic.
so. Yeah, like with sexual surrogacy and plus just the look, I mean, even with the sex workers, the stigma needs to be broken down, that I mean about them too. Like there's no shame, you know, in that work, if that's what they need to do and what works for them. So I think, yeah, an all around, you know, but because I know just the States has sexual surrogacy, don't they? Do they
I
have
think I heard they
something like
do, or
that?
some of
So
the states,
that's,
some of the states
yeah.
do.
Would that
I think.
benefit Canada? Do you think that would be a big help if there was access to, you know, that? Or do you think that would be a good solution?
Yeah, so
Part of it?
you know, yeah, so there's a lot to unpack here, which is very interesting. So first of
Mhm.
all, like we take for granted that there are sex workers, for example, or
Yeah.
sex surrogates who have disabilities themselves even, right? Or
Oh, right.
I'm currently working on a paper about OnlyFans, right? So the
Okay, yeah,
OnlyFans channel actually has like performers with disabilities even,
right.
right? So I mean,
Yeah.
also have people with disabilities involved in that kind of world and occupation. And the other thing too is that we need to think about what are the distinctions between like sex work and sex surrogacy, right?
Mhm.
There's some distinctions there in terms of how to access and the goals of it. So there's a lot of learning and unlearning, I guess, that needs to happen first.
Yeah.
But also, I was thinking, Carlos, about what you're saying, right? Sometimes there's an assumption that people with disabilities should just end up with other people with disabilities,
Yeah.
and nothing wrong with that. But in
Mhm.
some cases, not everyone wants that. So
Yeah.
I think part of it is also allowing people to have more access to community and more access to spaces that allow people to meet others, right? I spoke with so many folks with intellectual disabilities who had even curfews, right? They had to come back to their group homes like by
Yes.
9 p.m.
Yes.
I
Exactly.
mean, we all know that the fun usually happens after 9, right?
Yes.
After
Like
that,
Yeah.
you, at 9, you go to a friend's house, like to start the process of getting
That's
ready.
right.
So, I mean, that already curtails so many opportunities, right? How many
Mhm.
people with disabilities can go to college or university too? That's another space where a lot of people have
Yeah.
sexual experimentation and meet partners and so on. So, I think a big part of it too is how do we increase the access to spaces and communities for people with disabilities to have those experiences and build those connections? And this includes even sexy communities, right? One of my favorite interviews of all time still is this young man with a disability that we talk about we talk in an interview, and he talks about his foot fetish, right, for the whole interview. It was
Mhm.
really fun. I felt a little self-conscious because I
Yeah.
could see him looking at my feet, and I did not take care of it that day.
Yeah.
I felt a little self-conscious, but okay. But it was such a good conversation. And one of the things that really came across was this young man really wanted to participate in a community of other
Yeah.
folks who want to engage in,
Sure.
explore foot fetish. And, my job was kind of like, how do we facilitate that, right? Like
Yeah.
maybe it's the support worker doesn't know anyone in this community, but how can we find someone who can find someone and find that connection for them to be able to explore that side
Yeah.
of life?
Mm-hmm.
Like we have people with disabilities of all kinds with all desires. Some
Yeah.
people have different desires and fetishes, and they should also be allowed to explore this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like in your research with OnlyFans and individuals from the disability community working there, like, is there a worry there about people that have the fetishes? I know that there's a name for it, right? Because I know our
Mhm.
friend Bean on Push, poster behind me, she mentioned it in one of the episodes about how she gets lots of men DMing her, and she just finally said to one of them, why, what is the issue, like why are you contacting me? And some of them just said, oh, it's just we like to think, like, I like caregiving, I want to caregive. But then someone also said, well, you can't get away as easy, so it can get scary, so
Mhm.
have you like learned much about that and how the disability community feels about people with those fetishes?
For sure, right? Like we have the case of devotees, for example,
Devotees,
and
that's what it was. Yeah.
right, yeah, and it doesn't feel nice sometimes when you're
Yeah.
objectified or you just become your wheelchair, for
Yeah.
example, right, or your crutches. Like you're also an individual behind it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unless you want to be objectified because it's pleasurable to you, fine.
And that's your
But
power, right? That's
exactly,
got
but
the
I think
power to do that.
yeah, but of course, I think everyone or most people want to be seen as an individual,
As
right? Like
individual.
a
Yeah.
full individual most of the time. And again, like I think people with disabilities, sometimes the tricky part is showing that you're not just a disability label, right? Your
Yeah.
life is not, you're not just thinking about disability 24/7. You're thinking about a whole bunch of things in your
Yeah.
daily life, right?
Yeah, exactly. Have you experienced that, Carlos, before with anybody on when you were online dating?
Regarding the
The
objectifying
devotees that like
the
where they
devotees.
have that fetish towards somebody with a disability or
No, the mostly the experience that I have with online dating is trying to be honest about it and saying I have cerebral palsy, but then when you do that and then you changed because first of all you put it on your description and then you
Hmm.
leave it for a while and then you change it, you see the difference
Mhm.
because people approach you more. So sometimes I
Ah,
wonder,
yes.
that's the only issue I have. The objectification, I don't think I ever had that ever in my life. Although
Mhm.
some people say I should take advantage of it, but again, I,
Get your own
I,
OnlyFans
I
account?
get my
Hey.
own OnlyFans account. No, but I like that's the only thing that I have with online dating, and I'm not the only person that goes through it. I think a lot of people
Exactly.
that have a visible disability,
Yeah.
like myself, who are using crutches, who are you using a wheelchair, who are whatever you're using, whether you're intellectual disabilities. When people hear about, for example, you, Alan, are talking about today about intellectual disabilities or all those things, immediately people think, well, some people might assume, well, the guy is not smart enough.
Mhm.
How can the
Yeah.
guy how can the guy have pleasure of sex if he has an intellectual disability? And I'm just going, no, it's not like that. You need to get to know the person and figure out if the person can really communicate or not. You know what I mean? So that's the only experiences I have, that people assume again that we're not able to be good in bed, or we're not able to talk about sex, or 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 it's not going to be as pleasurable as the average yo person
Yeah.
who they're gonna have sex with. You know what I mean? So
Hmm. Yeah. No,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and it's online spaces are a space of its own, right? Like it's so
Hmm.
different from online, like in-person encounters in many, many ways. And a big piece it is that disclosure piece. Sometimes you have a little bit of more control over that. Like I've seen people, for example, who talked about using particular photos on their profiles,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Photos that might hide particular parts of their bodies or
Hmm.
particular features. They might postpone like disclosing their disability until really the last minute possible to see if the person would, get to know them first as an
Hmm.
individual.
Yeah.
So I've seen that. And I've seen also people who are like, I'm just going to be as open as possible from the beginning
Yeah.
because it's take it or leave it, like,
Hmm.
and that's
Yeah.
also a fair strategy. I guess one interesting concept that I like to play in my research is the sexual capital. I don't know if you heard of it, but sexual capital is basically like attributes or things that we bring to the table, basically, that kind of can increase our chances of finding a partner or getting the partner we want. And it's unfortunate in the society we live in today, disability is not seen as a form of sexual capital a lot of
Hmm.
times, right? It kind of decreases your
Hmm.
sexual capital.
Yeah.
But what I found is that a lot of folks that I talk to, they find other ways to increase their sexual capital. So they might say, yes, I do have a disability. I'm happy. And I'm also very good at giving massages. Also, I'm very good at this other things too.
Hmm.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
To kind of humanize and show like multiple things, and I bring a lot to the table. So I think there are some good examples out there. And to me, that's the best part is seeing examples of creativity. Like I remember one young man, he really wanted to take a dick pic. I mean, dick pics will come your way, like especially with
Oh
online
yeah.
dating.
Yeah.
Whether or not you want them, they will come
Yes,
your way.
they will.
Uh, And this young man, I think he has had cerebral palsy, and he couldn't take it on himself, the photo. So I was really amazed with the team in his house who mobilized to create this almost like concoction where he could place the phone, take the photo that he wanted,
Yeah.
you know, they gave him the space to take the
Yeah.
photos the way he wanted, and came back and did unhooked the concoction. And I
Yeah.
thought that was so genius, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
who said again that dick pics need to be like this, instantaneous thing? You go in front of the mirror, just take it yourself. It can look very differently for many people, and to me, that's one example. The last example of creativity that I love to mention is a couple with intellectual disabilities, and they really wanted to meet other couples and have fun nights, right? And what they found is that online was the way to meet people.
Okay.
But the problem was other couples without disabilities, they would notice that their spelling or grammar was a little off. And sometimes they would disclose their disability, and that would totally ruin, the night. So what they learned as a way around it is that before sending messages, they would go to the neighbor's house, and the neighbor would spell check and grammar check the messages for other couples. And that made them so much more successful and allow other couples to actually get to know them, as individuals. So, I mean, those are fantastic examples of creativity, people showing like, I'm going to find a way around this, barriers,
Yeah. And then having the support that will help you with that and empower you, and not, that's really actually very cool.
That is very cool.
Make it so he could take a dick pic, and set it up. So, I mean, and I don't know, to me, like that, it's safer, right? Because then they're able to have a conversation, like, who is this being sent to, because you got to be careful with that kind of stuff. But I mean, at least it's just empowering somebody. And oh, wow, that is actually very cool.
That is very cool.
And
all of them.
And I think that's what we should be doing, right? Encouraging experiences like this, supporting people. Because I've also seen the opposite, right? Folks that had so little privacy in their own homes, they were not allowed to have guests or have someone sleep over. And what it actually did is that it pushed people into doing things in the public, like people saying that public parks were the private space that they had. I mean, this is how much of a lack of privacy people had. And that is a disservice. We're putting people in a very dangerous position where they can land into trouble. So I don't think pushing out is the best, but it's much more about how do we support you have the life you want.
And that is great, because again, I would like to say that my parents were so liberal when it comes to, well, my parents in my community circle were liberal, not liberal, but they were open when it came to, that's the word I'm looking for, open when it came to sexuality, open when it came to teaching us what intimacy was all about. And it was from both of my parents, from my dad, from my mom, and all of my house. And for me, to come into Canada, which is more like, well, Alberta is very conservative, but still more open-minded community or country than other countries, to see that, or to hear also that there's people that are living here in Canada who did not have that privacy, but they had to go into public spaces such as the park or such as whichever to experience this. I think it's definitely not the best way to go, but I can understand why they did that. And if I was in their shoes, I might have done the same thing, because you want to have this intimacy part, this romantic part of it, and this openness with a couple of persons. But this brings me into a question about, how, because some people get afraid again of the whole sexualizing context of for example, again, doing it at home when your parents are there, if we want to book it into a into a hotel, or do we need a staff member, or do we need someone? How private could that be? It's just, what have been your experience, other than the examples you have given from other people who might have this openness on not having that privacy or having the privacy, if that's a question that it was brought correctly. So
No, absolutely. What the most successful examples that I've seen are those that actually listen to disabled people, right? Because people with disabilities know very well what work for them and what it's comfortable. So as long as we listen to people, like, how can I support? How can I facilitate this, right? How much you want me as a support worker or sibling or family member to be involved? Right. And I think empowering people to be the guides in that process, right? Maybe it's just supporting someone, putting them into bed, right? And then they'll take care of the rest themselves. Sometimes it's a little bit more than that, helping them undress or helping them clean up afterwards. And I think we just need to feel more comfortable having those conversations. And, I understand, like, as a culture in general, sometimes we're not trained or that, or learned that sexuality is okay to talk about. So it's a lot of learning and unlearning from everyone's part, right? So I don't expect everyone to become a sexpert overnight. Even myself, it's now that I compare, like when I first started doing this kind of research, I was in my first or second year of undergraduate studies, like more than a decade ago. And I remember my very first interview about this topic was like the most ridiculous one because I could not say the word sex like comfortably.
Right, yeah.
I was coming from a family that did not talk about sex at all. And now suddenly I'm like asking people about their sexual lives. And I remember like my professor at the time, she was like, Alan, every time you'll need to say the word sex, it's almost like you're whispering sex because of that discomfort. And, I really appreciate the work that I do as a researcher because it completely changed my own life as a sexual person too. It made me so much more comfortable talking about this topic. It gave me the language that I did not have growing up to talk about this. So I think it requires that openness and willingness to learn, right? That willingness to step a little bit outside of your comfort zone sometimes and to sometimes not know even. I still have moments that I'm like, I don't know what to do or I don't know what this is or what to say, but let's navigate this together,
Have you encountered, Alan, somebody who has a partner, whether it's a heterosexual partner or from the LGBTQ community, and they might think that automatically that person is their support worker, if they're able-bodied or not? Because, or if that person thinks of themselves as a support worker, they might think about it too, because on my experience, sometimes, not lately, not the last one, but in previous ones, I'm thinking all the time, oh, they might think that this person is my support worker, you know what I mean? And it's not the case, it's not the case. It's not the case. So what would your advice be to those people who are like, who have that mentality of you have an able-bodied girlfriend or, who is with you, and they might think that whether you have a relationship, she's more like your support worker and she's just satisfying your needs, which is not really correct. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's amazing how so many folks now with disabilities and couples are using social media to talk about this stuff and really try to break some of the myths, right? And they often talk about cases like this where their non-disabled partner will be seen as a support worker or someone who's just providing care. Very problematic idea, right? It comes with lots of assumptions. I think we need to challenge the fact that we desexualize people with disabilities. Why is it that we don't expect people with disabilities to be sexual in the first place or to be attractive, to be seen as attractive and sexy? Again, it kind of takes us back to what we consider to be, in quotes, normal, right? Normal sexualities, normal sex, and normal scripts. We need to challenge all of those, right? Because why do we need to have those? Even with folks in the community that I sometimes work with, like folks with intellectual disabilities, right? Because of the infantilization that I see so often, sometimes I see like Johnny and Mike holding hands, and we all know they're making out at the parking lot, but people are still like, oh, they're just besties. Like, no, if you only knew what Mike and John, and John are doing at the back of the parking lot, they know better than you do, even, so it's just amazing. Like, we don't expect the same, or sometimes we don't allow people with disabilities to have the same experiences. So one example is like, I was on the bus, a few weeks ago, and this couple without any visible disabilities, they're making out really, really hard in front of me, right? I felt like I should volunteer to join at one point. It was so active,
All right.
it was really going. Nobody talked about it, and it wasn't a big issue. But I've seen cases of folks
Yeah.
with visible disabilities who are doing the same act, right? And it's interpreted very differently. Like it's interpreted with surprise
Wow.
or like, oh, disgust, or this is not okay, this isn't
Mhm.
appropriate,
That's
and that's a
Right?
problem.
that is a
Yeah.
problem. That is a problem, and that's something that's
Yeah.
it's a little frustrated because, as you said, those people deserved the same love or the same
Yeah.
motion, the same making out as an able-bodied person, whether it's with whatever, whether it's a Mike and a John or whoever it is, it's
Yeah.
they need to have that connection and that love the same way and the view the same way, and it's yeah, it is frustrating
Yeah.
for sure.
And the space to make mistakes. Like
Yeah,
that's the other
yeah.
thing that is so common. I've seen so many people who, as soon as they like in quotes, kind of make a mistake in their relationships, they get punished. They get more surveillance in their lives, right? Or there are judgments around like their ability to have relationships, their capacity, right?
Mhm.
But I don't see that happening with non-disabled people, right? Like we kind of assume that sometimes bad relationships happen. You kind of learn from them because there's no guidebook to love and relationships. You just learn from experience and you move on, right? And I mean, I'm sure many people listening to us today, you can look back and say, oh my God, why did I date Johnny for 2 years of my life?
Mhm.
That awful
Mhm.
decision, Alan. Why did you do that? But yeah,
Yeah.
like nobody comes to me and says, Alan, this is clearly a sign that you cannot make decisions yourself, right? So I think we also need to allow people with
Exactly.
disabilities to practice sexuality, to
Mhm.
make mistakes and
Mhm.
learn from them and move on, right?
Mhm.
Like that's
Yeah.
how we learn.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
Well, I think the work you guys are doing is definitely going to help with that. So is it just a virtual thing like you guys are doing, putting the information out, or can people come to you when they just need, I don't know, education on something, or how does the lab work?
Yeah, so right now the lab is fully virtual,
Mhm.
but we do have a lot of ways of communicating with folks. So I get emails from people requesting kinds of materials, or the organization sometimes they're like, I want to know what the research says about this question.
Mhm.
And now we have a series that we only have like 2-page reports that summarize like what do we know about this topic, right?
Right.
Just the facts, no judgment, just the
Yeah.
facts.
Mm.
So we're definitely open to collaborating with community partners, people with lived experiences, anyone who can benefit from what we can bring to the table.
And is it free or does it have a cost, Alan, for the virtual thing? Or anybody,
Mhm.
for example, the average Joe or Carlos, for example, can go and be like, hey, I want to, I'm not afraid to admit that I might want to go in, and require your virtual lab, right?
Knowledge and
So
yeah.
knowledge. So would it be like a costly thing or would it be free? How would that work?
100% free. So
Awesome.
Mhm.
everything we create, we try to, we always thinking about accessibility, right?
Okay.
We want to
Mhm.
make sure that as many people can use it, copy, paste, print it, and do whatever they want with this material. And we always, we write text descriptions, like visual descriptions of images. So we try to make it as accessible as we can, right?
Yep.
And
Awesome.
we try to focus on different folks, right? So some of the material we create is for people with lived experience, but some of them are also like tips for parents and caregivers, like how do you
Yes.
have the conversation about sex day. We also
Yes.
have material
Going in our
for,
newsletter this week and putting that one in.
it's amazing, right? Like how
Yeah.
do we support parents, and like we know parents want to do well, and how do we give them the tools to do so?
Yeah.
And same with service providers, siblings. So we're like trying to reach out to everyone
That's
in
awesome.
that group of care, right?
That's awesome. That is
Anything that is
fantastic.
sex education should be free. Birth control should be free. Condoms should always be free. All of those things, it should always be free and just out there. And just walk by a bowl and grab a handful. It should be.
Absolutely, and more accessible and creative too,
Yeah.
right? Like, so that's what we're trying to do too. Like, I remember talking to this young man, and he was so confused about the banana from sex
Mhm.
education. Like, I don't know what this banana means, and I mean,
Yeah.
like, we kind of take for granted that we just assume everyone knows what banana equals,
Exactly.
penis, but that's not always the case. So
That's
how can we
right.
make this information also accessible in the way of using creative ways? Like, for example, like you saw the emoji with the eggplant, and
Yeah.
it's like, what does this emoji mean? A, B, or C?
To me, an eggplant has nothing to do with, like, I look at that and I'm like, I never would, I would maybe the pickle or something, but like, I'm like, why is it an eggplant? Who picked the eggplant for it to be representation? Because to me, when I look at an eggplant, that's the last thing I think of.
Well, I honestly, when I look at your emojis, Alan, when I went to with Leah, I'm like, I don't know what half of this emojis mean, and I feel bad because I'm already like 38. I'm not even that young, and I don't know what half of these emojis mean. Like I know a few of them, but that's why it's good to go to your lab and to your Twitter page, and we
Yes.
learn this thing,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
Oh, I'm learning to, believe me. Like
Yeah.
sometimes like I got requests from people. Like someone said, Alan, you should create a resource about like what's sexident means. And I'm like, what is a sexident? And I had to actually Google to learn. Sexidents are basically like when you get hurt during sex. You might ski your knee or bump your head
Nice.
into the bedpost or something like this.
oh wow.
That's true. Oh my gosh, never would have thought.
I had no idea that there was a name for it. I mean,
Right.
lots of us have experienced some kind of accident, but here we are. So I'm also learning as I go.
Well, it's
Oh,
good
that's
to hear that
awesome.
you are learning as you go, though.
Yeah.
That's
Something
interesting.
like
That's good.
that.
That's good to hear.
Yes. So one might say that you are helping people have sex without limits. So that leads us into our life without limits conversation. So do you yourself feel like, what does life without limits mean to you? And I guess maybe thinking of your brother too, what life without limits, and how you maybe help him, and how you want to help people live a life without limits.
For me, the word that comes into mind is really empowerment, like
Mm-hmm.
empowering folks, right? Making space for people with disabilities to have a voice of their own, right? So it's not other people speaking for, but
Yeah.
it's really working with, and that's what I'm trying to do in the lab. Like we're working with community partners, working with people with disabilities.
Yeah.
Like everything we produce and create is always based on needs that people identify and bring to us.
Yeah.
Because people with lived experience should be the ones leading the agenda and deciding what counts as sex and what counts sexuality. And living a life without limits means really expanding of many of options about what counts as sexuality, what counts as sexy, what counts as sex. And I think everyone will have a much better life if we have a bigger menu of options.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely true.
Well,
And we'll make sure in the show notes people know where to find your social media so they can, because I mean, every day I'm like, okay, I'm retweeting it from ours and the Alberta Ability Network and getting the word out there. And yeah, I'm going to put information into our newsletter too, because we have a kids and teens section that I like to put in things for parents to read and, about mental health and everything. And I think adding something like this and putting your graphics into there is just a really great addition, because it's important.
it's very important.
Very important.
Absolutely.
No,
So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Like it's been so encouraging the feedback we're getting from folks. Like,
Good.
and the best sign is that it's a conversation starter, if anything.
Yeah.
People using this to start a conversation. And that to me is already a big win.
Yeah.
mhm.
Good. No, it's
Well,
great work.
thank you, Alan. Thank you for being here. Thank you for enlightening us with all this wonderful information. And hopefully, well, not hopefully, I know people will definitely learn so much from this. And we'll,
Yeah.
as Leah said, we'll put it on the description so people can connect with you. And who knows, maybe I'll connect with you because I think we'll benefit a lot from this,
Absolutely.
this information as
I know
well.
this was definitely another hour gone by way too fast.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I do want to have more conversations and maybe inviting other people on and just having group discussions about this sort of thing. Because, yeah, I think the topic needs to be definitely spoken about more for sure.
No, thank you so much, both of you, for having me today and for such an amazing conversation. I really appreciate it.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
Thank you. And for all of you who are listening, I hope you enjoy this show as much as we did. And if you are wanting to join, just like Alan and as so many guests we have, feel free to visit My Life with Alamis podcast and connect with myself or Leah for being a guest here. And whatever you want to talk about will be great to have you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Great.
And please don't forget to live your life without limits. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.